Welcome to This Week in Racing. It's a very open wheel heavy week that we've got to talk about, but don't fret if you're all hyped up about stock car racing, NASCAR, and the Darlington Throwback Weekend. Be sure to check out the video I released earlier today breaking down what I think are the top 10 1990s NASCAR paint schemes. So, with that out of the way, let's talk some F1 and some IndyCar because there's some huge silly season news and schedule news and current year news about each of these series, and some of it is actually intertwined. So at the end of the Formula One summer break, generally this is contract time, and as soon as they get to Spa, we get a ton of announcements. That was no different this year. Valtteri Bottas has decided he will stay at Mercedes, or I guess rather Mercedes decided Valtteri will stay, but that is kind of caused a bit of an avalanche, because Mercedes reserve driver Esteban Ocon, who raced for Force India, or what is now known as Racing Point, in 2017, and he will move to Renault next season, replacing Nico Hulkenburg and teaming with Daniel Ricciardo. Now, of course, Renault is another factory team in Formula One. A lot of people forget that because their performance has been so terrible. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Esteban Ocon can help raise the profile of that team with the help of Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, certainly, a couple of years ago, Ocon and Ricciardo were two of the hottest prospects, period, in Formula One, and now they're both at Renault. We'll see if they can make anything happen. Hulkenberg is not going to be out of Formula One, though. It's rumored, it hasn't been confirmed anywhere, that he will move to Haas, potentially replacing Romain Grosjean and teaming with Kevin Magnussen. Now, where Romain Grosjean could go is anyone's guess, but surely the golden parachute that will be provided by Rich Energy will be a massive check, I'm sure. And it wasn't just the drivers getting silly in the world of F1. The Formula One schedule for 2020 was released, featuring an unprecedented amount of races, 22 across the globe for the Globetrotting Series. We have two new rounds we've talked about before in Vietnam, and a return to Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix. That is going to be, I know I overuse this word, but interesting considering how narrow that track is. If you've ever driven it in Assetto Corsa, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. And unfortunately, Germany, the Hockenheim Ring, will not be on the calendar, despite the fact that race was one of the best Formula One races in recent memories. I guess they didn't want to expand the schedule to 23 races. And there's also a little bit of a note on the schedule that the Italian Grand Prix right now is kind of a question mark because there hasn't been any signatures between Formula One and the Italian Grand Prix at Monza to make that race happen. I would assume it's going to happen, seeing as it's one of the most iconic races on the Formula One calendar, but I figured I would mention it here just for posterity's sake. Speaking of schedules, IndyCar is getting set to release its 2020 schedule, and as reported by Adam Stern over at the SBJ, the 2020 IndyCar schedule is looking like, more increasingly likely anyway, that Richmond will be added to the schedule, and that the 500-mile race in Pocono is going to officially be finished, which I think I'm going to have to do a whole separate video on that. I already asked for your guys' opinions over in the community tab on my channel, and I'll actually hopefully be able to integrate some of those reactions into the video I'll do about Pocono once it's confirmed that race is gone. But for now, let's talk about Richmond just really quick, because I think there are a lot of questions about Richmond, and a lot of people have forgotten that Richmond is actually a returning race, not a brand new race to IndyCar. Their last race was 2009. They ran with the Indy Racing League between 2009 and 2001. And it wasn't a bad track for IndyCar racing. In fact, I remember the first couple of races there I really enjoyed. Of course, I was young, and generally speaking, the races at Richmond were a wreckfest. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the track is so small, especially for Indy cars that are approaching 185 miles an hour. And I would imagine the pole speed is probably going to be somewhere around 180, 185 miles an hour. That's blindingly fast around a track that's less than a mile. But the closing rates are tremendous at a track like this, and you do get a lot of incidents. The reason they left, and it's kind of a thing there was I think some sour grapes between IndyCar and Richmond back in 2009. They usually got pretty good crowds, but unfortunately the 2009 race was absolutely awful. This is going to sound a little bit familiar to you modern racing fans too. Was that IndyCar was using a certain aero package for their short ovals, which was pretty high downforce, pretty high drag, and a lot of turbulence behind the cars. And the race was terrible. There was virtually no passing. The guys were just pretty much running around in a line the whole race. Not a lot of lap traffic either, which usually helps these short oval races be a bit more exciting. And a lot of fans, and I think the track management too, considering they didn't come back in 2010, were pretty unhappy with the whole situation. So from that perspective, I guess it's good that Richmond is coming back. I even said, hey, look, after Gateway, even though some people will not consider that a short oval, I will say it races like a short oval, therefore I will call it a short oval. I think, the IndyCar product on the short ovals right now is pretty damn good. Obviously, I think you'd want to see the tire degradation issue that we kind of saw at Gateway and a little bit at Iowa. I'd like to see that reined in a little bit. Hopefully there'll be a test so that they can kind of nail down what kind of compounds they would use at a race at Richmond to make sure that the on-track racing product is acceptable, especially for a return. Now, the one thing I will say, and maybe it's a bit of a teaser for the Pocono video, is that Pocono lasted on the schedule for 7 seasons, 6 years, if that makes any sense. That's a pretty long time, especially considering recent history with IndyCar racing. I gotta ask the question: is this race in Richmond? And I'm happy to be proven wrong here, but is a race in Richmond, which hasn't had a race since 2009, and they didn't leave on the best terms to begin with, and quite frankly, the NASCAR race doesn't get a huge crowd anymore at Richmond like they used to, especially when IndyCar was running there in the last decade. So, is Richmond going to last 7 years? Is this really a long-term prospect for IndyCar? Now, certainly if they get the promotion and the marketing and the passion behind the project the Gateway has, sure, of course it will probably last. But recent trends suggest less Gateways and more, Phoenixes or, even Pocono, which, again, it was a race that the crowd increased over the course of the race. But, it is what it is. And finally, a little bit of crossover between IndyCar and Formula One. Conor Daly will be replacing Marcus Ericsson at this weekend's Portland Grand Prix. Ericsson has flown over to Spa-Francorchamps to be on standby at Alfa Romeo Racing, where he's the reserve driver for Kimi Räikkönen, who injured his foot at some point during the F1 summer break. Now, obviously, this is not just, they didn't pick Conor Daly out of a hat randomly. I think a lot of people are convinced that this is a McLaren tryout for next season, to see if Conor Daly is made of the stuff that he has shown so far throughout this season. And to be honest with you, I think he is. I think he does deserve a 2020 full-time ride, whether it's McLaren or whether it's with somebody else. But regardless, this is a fun thing. This is a fun opportunity. It also means that Conor Daly will have finished the last, 4 races with 3 different teams. That's kind of funny because, of course, he's running with Andretti with the Air Force at Laguna Seca. So, this is going to be the continuous story throughout this offseason as we kind of close in on the end of the IndyCar season is, what's McLaren going to do? Who are they going to hire? Who are the best people to bring into that team? And I have to tell you, I think one of the things that makes Conor Daly so great as a driver, and we've seen that so much this year, is one word: adaptability. And if you look at when McLaren got bumped from the Indy 500, what was the word you think they were lacking? Adaptability. So bringing in a driver who kind of has that attitude, kind of has that work ethic for racing, I think it's the right fit, because if your driver can make up for some of the weaknesses maybe on the boardroom side or maybe some of the team issues, I think that's a good fit. I think it's a good idea. Now, here's the other thing that kind of this brings up is we know Marcus Ericsson's almost certainly out at Schmidt, or McLaren, I guess we'll call it that now, because apparently McLaren has bought all their own stuff. I mean, they've essentially just said, here, Sam, we're going to pay you some lease money and we're going to just move into your shop. That's essentially what's happening. It's an oversimplification, but ideal in oversimplifications. So that means there's, all the Schmidt equipment is up for grabs. And so you've got Marcus Ericsson, who may or may not be in Formula One next year. So a lot of people are convinced that Giovinazzi is not very good, and Kimi Räikkönen is outperforming him so much that maybe Alfa Romeo would look at somebody else, like bringing Marcus Ericsson back into the team. I don't think so. I think he would be a better fit at Carlin on the IndyCar side. Again, we'll have to see. That's a long way off. And then you kind of go across and look at, okay, well, are there 1 or 2 seats available at McLaren? And the recent rumors have suggested that all that Schmidt equipment I was just talking about, Rick Peterson, who is the P in SPM, is going to take all that equipment and start his own team with James Hinchcliffe as the driver. This is the rumor. So if there are 2 seats at McLaren, you theoretically, if you're Zach Brown, you could go out and get Conor Daly, and you could go get Santino Ferrucci, or you could get Philippe Nasr, or you could bring in Nicola Latifi. You could bring in any of these drivers that you want, and it definitely would open up your options. And hey, we'd get an extra car on the grid. But all that being said, and honestly, for the competitiveness of the series, if it is only 1 seat and James Hinchcliffe is staying at McLaren Arrow, I think Conor coming in would be best for business, because then you keep Santino Ferrucci over at Dale Coyne, keep that team fairly competitive, and kind of evenly distribute the talent throughout the grid. But it could be that there are now going to be 2 McLarens on the grid, plus a Schmidt car or a Peterson car with James Hinchcliffe behind the wheel. I don't know. This will be fun when all this information finally comes to light and we find out what everybody is going to be doing. So that was This Week in Racing. Very open wheel heavy, so a lot of you will be happy by that, and some of you won't be. But regardless, if you enjoy motorsport content, you're in the right place. Subscribe for more. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.